Today in my presentation at the Jeju Forum, I was looking at maritime confidence building measures and some of the areas where we've had recent progress as well as the continuing challenges. Northeast Asia has many navies and coast guards are getting larger, but the seas are the same size. So that creates an obvious challenge for policymakers to contain tensions and make sure that the interactions between the coast guards and the navies are as professional as possible. Recently we've had some progress between navy to navy interactions and also between air forces. It's much more difficult, however, I think, to get coast guards to work because they are not used to dealing with each other internationally. Therefore the cultures may be more different, the procedures may be more different. And that's one area where I think we could usefully address. I will also say that in terms of the countries in our region, even where we have political tensions and disputes sometimes, for example between Korea and Japan or between Japan and Russia, we don't have collisions happening at sea. So that, I think, tells an important story that even where you have a political problem, there may be another issue involved where you have actual tensions and collisions happening on the water, as we've seen recently in the East China Sea and the South China Sea. One of the commentators in our session pointed to the Indian Ocean as a positive model for where India, Bangladesh and Myanmar have taken their disputes in recent years to international courts. And they've abided by the decisions of those international courts, in some cases ending disputes which have existed for decades. And when those disputes have occurred in the past, there has been some tension, even the risk of conflict. So that's one positive aspect to the model in the Indian Ocean. There's another aspect to this. The size disparity between India and Bangladesh is very significant. In some senses, that may remind people of the relationship between China and some of its maritime neighbours in East Asia. So I think it's a good model that India has agreed to be the benevolent big brother in the Indian Ocean and accept the judgment of the courts, even though it may lose some of its resource claims into the bargain. So I think that's something that one region can usefully impart from the west of Asia to the east of Asia, where so far, unfortunately, although we've had an improvement in professional encounters, we haven't had the same confidence in legal models, which Indian cases have shown. I would like to make one other point as well, which is maritime confidence building measures are important. They're important because they reduce the chances for conflict happening by accident. That's useful, but I think that gain needs to be seen in context. There are other issues in the region where accidental conflict is not necessarily the relevant issue, particularly if one party is pushing it by intention, but at a lower level of risk. That's much more difficult for policymakers to address because it's not just about accidental conflict, it's also about the strategy that lies behind it. I hope that cooperation can theoretically spiral upward, and cooperation is a difficult thing to predict. Sometimes the triggers can be quite small if you find a project that you can work on together. Even if you have the right personalities who are able to build a relationship, that can produce an effect which over time becomes institutionalized. But I think we also have to be realistic that in order for the cooperation to spiral upwards rather than spiral downwards, it needs to have political will and political buy-in. That's the key thing. In many cases we have professionals from one military or one coast guard and professionals from the other, their counterparts. Both of them, they know that they have to interact regularly on the sea or in the air. They're aware of the risks and they want to conclude a professional code of conduct. But unfortunately, the obstacle is at the political level, because the agreement may be understood, it may be ready to be signed, but until the political obstacle is removed, those officials are unable to get the backing for that agreement that they need. Korea has a lot, I think, to contribute because of the security situation between North and South. Koreans are used to living with a very high level of tension in their divided country. That gives them, I think, lessons for other countries that are less used to being able to manage those tensions. So Korea can also be a model for the rest of the world that way, even though, of course, Korea wants more than anything else to end the conflict on its own peninsula. Jeju is also a unique island for Korea. It faces onto the East China Sea, so it's your southernmost point of territory. That gives a maritime perspective which is not just focused on the dangers to the north. I think the challenge for Korea is to see the wider region and the wider world as an area where they can contribute instead of only focusing on the DMZ and the problems politically across the divided peninsula. So I see Jeju Forum as playing a bridge in two ways. It can bring expertise into Korea from the outside, but also it's a forum to demonstrate Korea's unique advantages and its own efforts to contain and address the root causes of conflict and hopefully apply those on a broader global and regional wide model. Think tanks have a very obvious advantage compared to officials in that we can say what we think. So we have a freedom. That freedom is very significant. I previously served as an official in government, so I understand the constraints that officials are under. Even if they want to say something and they know the answer, they can't. So think tanks can play a bridge between policy and the wider public debate. But think tanks are also able to be creative and to produce solutions that officials haven't thought of. Governments tend to be very linear in their approach. Sometimes there's a real danger of groupthink, that they only address a problem in the conventional way that has been done in the past. So to generate a genuine outside thought, maybe it doesn't happen all that often, but that's the goal as a think tank, is to be able to provide that outside spark that can generate something really new, but also to produce it in a way that's accessible for policymakers. Their attention is very limited. Usually they will not be able to read anything more than 2 pages maximum, sometimes only 1 page. Universities and academics produce very long essays, but sometimes that knowledge is inaccessible. A think tank is trying to do something different. Academics look at a small problem and they make it complex. That's part of their discipline. In the think tank world, the cone is inverted, so you are trying to make things simple from a more complex set of phenomena. That's the challenge and the role that we hope to play.